My older sister smiled, looked directly at me, and raised her glass. Everything I have, she said proudly, I earned. The entire room applauded. My parents smiled. My relatives congratulated her. Then Grandma quietly whispered 6 words that changed everything. No, sweetheart. You spent Grace's future. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward Grandma. My sister laughed. I don't know what you're talking about. Grandma didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she reached into her purse, pulled out a small silver key, and handed it to the family lawyer. After my funeral, she said calmly, open my safety deposit box. My father immediately stood up. Mom, this isn't the time. Grandma looked him straight in the eyes. No. The right time was 12 years ago. My mother's face turned pale. My sister stopped smiling. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't the only person who knew something was terribly wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. Because inside that safety deposit box were 12 years of bank records, handwritten journals, signed withdrawal slips, and one letter that would prove my parents hadn't simply taken my college fund. They had given it away, one payment at a time. But before I tell you what Grandma had been hiding, you need to understand how my future disappeared long before I ever realized it was gone. My name is Grace Mitchell. I'm 30 years old. And for most of my childhood, I believed my parents had prepared for my future. Every birthday. Grandma Eleanor handed me a card. Inside was always the same message. Keep studying. Your education is something no one can ever take from you. As a little girl, I smiled, thanked her, and tucked the card away without thinking much about it. Years later, I would discover she had been trying to warn me. I grew up in what everyone considered the perfect family. My father, Thomas Mitchell, owned a successful construction company. My mother, Janet, managed everything at home with military precision. Our lawn was always trimmed. Our holidays always looked perfect. Our family photographs always showed smiling faces. From the outside, we looked happy. Inside, everything revolved around one person. My older sister, Sophia. She was 3 years older than me. Beautiful, confident, popular. The kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became the center of attention. Teachers loved her. Neighbors praised her. Relatives called her the pride of the Mitchell family. I wasn't ignored. Not exactly. I was simply expected to understand. Whenever Sophia wanted something expensive, my parents found the money. When she wanted piano lessons, they paid. When she wanted horseback riding, they paid. When she wanted a newer car before college, Dad somehow made it happen. If I asked why things always seemed easier for Sophia, Mom would smile and say, she's older. When you're her age, we'll do the same for you. I believed her, because children believe their parents, even when they shouldn't. Grandma Eleanor never made comparisons. Whenever she visited, she brought both of us books instead of toys. She believed stories lasted longer than expensive gifts. One afternoon, when I was about 12, she found me reading alone on the back porch. She sat beside me without saying anything. After a few minutes, she asked, do you know why I like books so much? I shrugged. They tell good stories? She smiled. Because the truth always survives inside them. At the time, I thought she was talking about novels. Now, I know she was talking about families. By the time I entered high school, I had one dream. I wanted to study architecture, not because of my father. Ironically, he hoped I would join the family construction business. I wanted to design affordable homes for families who could never afford an architect. Every spare minute, I sketched buildings, libraries, schools, community centers. My art teacher once told me, you don't just draw houses, you draw hope. Those words stayed with me. I worked harder than anyone in my class, honor roll, scholarships, weekend jobs. I believed every sacrifice was bringing me closer to the future my parents had promised me. I had no idea. That future had already been sold, long before graduation. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday. I still remember the exact moment. I had just finished my shift at a local grocery store when I opened the mailbox. There it was, a large white envelope. The logo of Westbrook School of Architecture was printed across the front. For a second, I simply stared at it. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. When I finally opened the envelope, the first words I saw were, "Congratulations." I screamed. Not because I was surprised, because I had worked for that moment since I was 14 years old. Late nights, weekend jobs, perfect grades, scholarships, countless hours drawing building designs while my friends were out having fun. Every sacrifice suddenly felt worth it. I ran inside the house. "Dad! Mom! I got in!" Mom hugged me. Dad smiled proudly. Even Sophia clapped politely. For one evening, everything felt normal. For one evening, I believed my future had finally begun. I had no idea. It was already over. A week later, the university sent the tuition statement, even after scholarships. There was still a balance that needed to be paid. I wasn't worried. Not at all. Since I was a little girl, my parents had always said the same thing. "Don't worry about college. We've been saving for your education since the day you were born." Dad had repeated those words dozens of times. Mom had repeated them even more. So that Saturday morning, I sat down at the kitchen table with the tuition papers. Dad quietly looked through them. Then, he sighed. A long, heavy sigh. Something immediately felt wrong. "Grace," he began, "we need to talk." No parent has ever started a good conversation with those 4 words. I looked at Mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, she stared into her coffee. Sophia wasn't there. She had gone shopping with friends. Dad folded the tuition statement. "The college fund. It's gone." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I genuinely thought he was joking. "What do you mean?" Mom finally spoke. "There isn't any money left." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense. You've been saving for 18 years. Dad rubbed his forehead. "Things happened." "What things?" Neither of them answered. I looked from one parent to the other. "How much is left?" Silence. "Dad, how much?" He whispered. "Nothing." The word echoed inside my head. Nothing. Not a few $1,000s. Not half. Nothing. Every dollar that had supposedly been saved for my future had disappeared. I couldn't understand it. "There has to be some mistake." Dad shook his head. "There isn't." "What happened to it?" Mom answered before he could. "We had family responsibilities." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means sometimes parents have to make difficult financial decisions." That wasn't an answer. It was an excuse. I pushed the tuition papers across the table. "You promised." Dad quietly nodded. "I know." "You told me not to worry." "I know." "You told me to focus on school." "I know." Every answer sounded exactly the same. Not explanations, just regret. Then I asked the question that changed everything. Did the money help someone else? Neither of them spoke. Their silence told me everything. It hadn't disappeared. It had been spent. On someone. Just then, the front door opened. Sophia walked inside carrying several expensive shopping bags, designer shoes, new clothes, a luxury handbag I'd seen advertised for almost $2,000. She smiled. "What's everyone so serious about?" Nobody answered. She looked at me. What happened? I slowly stood. My college fund is gone. Her smile disappeared, only for a second. Then, she looked at Mom. Mom gave her the smallest nod. It lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. Sophia placed the shopping bags on the counter. I'm sure Mom and Dad had their reasons. I stared at her. You already knew. It wasn't a question. She folded her arms. I knew money was tight. No. You knew about my college fund. She didn't answer. Again. Silence. Another answer without words. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by acceptance letters, scholarship certificates, architecture sketches, dreams that suddenly had nowhere to go. Around midnight, there was a quiet knock on my bedroom door. It wasn't Mom. It wasn't Dad. It was Grandma Eleanor. She slowly walked inside carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate, exactly the way she had done whenever I was sick as a child. She sat beside me on the floor. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she asked, Did they tell you? I nodded. They said the money's gone. Grandma closed her eyes, as if hearing those words hurt her more than it hurt me. Then she quietly asked, Did they also tell you where it went? I looked at her. No. She took a deep breath. I was afraid of that. For the first time in my life. Grandma looked disappointed. Not in me. In her own son. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded bank receipt. Then, just as quickly, she put it back. Not because she'd changed her mind. Because she wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, she gently took my hand. Grace, I need you to promise me something. What? No matter what happens. Don't let today convince you that your future has been stolen. I looked around my room. My future is gone. She slowly shook her head. No. Only the path changed. I didn't understand. How could she say that? The money was gone. College was slipping away. My dream school expected payment in less than 3 weeks. There was no miracle coming, or so I believed. 3 days later, I declined my place at Westbrook. The admissions counselor cried on the phone. She had followed my application from the beginning. Grace, are you sure? I swallowed hard. I don't have a choice. She quietly replied, I hope someday you get another chance. So did I. Instead of attending college, I accepted a full-time position at the grocery store. 38 hours became 45, then 50, every evening. I walked past the architecture books stacked beside my bed, unable to open them. Not because I had stopped loving architecture, because looking at them reminded me of everything I'd lost. Over the next 12 years, I never once asked my parents about the money again, not because I'd forgiven them, because I already knew something they didn't realize. People can hide the truth, but they can't hide guilt. Every time college was mentioned, Mom changed the subject. Dad became unusually quiet. And whenever Grandma visited, she looked at my parents with a sadness I couldn't explain. Only years later, after her funeral, would I finally understand why. Because while everyone else believed the story had ended the day I gave up college, Grandma had quietly begun writing a different ending. One receipt, one journal entry, one bank statement at a time. Grandma Eleanor's funeral was held on a cold October afternoon. The church was filled beyond capacity. Former teachers, neighbors, old friends, people she had quietly helped over the years. I wasn't surprised. Grandma had lived the kind of life that couldn't be measured by money. She remembered birthdays. She baked pies for neighbors who were sick. She volunteered at the public library every Thursday for nearly 20 years. She tutored children who couldn't afford private lessons. She never asked for recognition. She simply believed that if you had the ability to help someone, you should. The pastor said something during his eulogy that stayed with me. Some people leave behind possessions. Eleanor Mitchell left behind better people. Looking around the church, I realized how true those words were. Almost everyone there had a story about Grandma, how she had paid someone's electric bill without signing her name, how she had bought winter coats for children whose parents couldn't afford them, how she had secretly paid a single mother's rent after her husband passed away. She had changed lives quietly, exactly the way she preferred. After the burial, most families gathered for lunch. Ours gathered for something else, an appointment. Attorney Michael Brooks had instructed every immediate family member to meet him at his office at 3 o'clock sharp. He had been Grandma's attorney for almost 30 years. He was also one of her closest friends. When we arrived, his receptionist led us into the largest conference room. In the center of the polished oak table sat a small black metal box. It wasn't very large, about the size of a shoebox. A silver bank seal still wrapped around it. Attached to the handle was a white tag. In Grandma's familiar handwriting were the words, "Safety Deposit Box, number 417. Below that, she had written one final instruction: open only after my funeral, with my entire family present. Dad immediately recognized the handwriting. His shoulders became tense. Mom looked uncomfortable. Sophia glanced nervously toward the box before quickly looking away. It was subtle, but I noticed. Attorney Brooks entered carrying a thick leather folder. He greeted each of us politely. Then he sat down. Eleanor gave me very specific instructions. He rested both hands on the table. Nothing inside this box may be removed until every document has been read. Dad forced a smile. Mom always liked being dramatic. Michael looked directly at him. No, Eleanor disliked drama. What she disliked was dishonesty. The room became noticeably quieter. Dad cleared his throat. So, what's inside? Michael answered without emotion. Evidence. One word. Nothing more. Nothing less. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Evidence of what? Michael slowly turned toward her. I believe. You already know. Nobody answered. He carefully broke the bank seal, unlocked the box, lifted the lid. Inside, everything had been organized with incredible precision. Brown envelopes, blue folders, small notebooks, several USB drives, photographs, bank statements bundled together with paper clips, handwritten journals tied neatly with ribbon, and on top of everything, a yellow sticky note. Michael smiled sadly. He picked it up and read it aloud. Michael, if my family is looking surprised, you're opening the correct box. Despite the tension, a few people smiled. That sounded exactly like Grandma. Even now, she managed to bring warmth into a painful room. Michael removed the first folder. Across the front, Grandma had written, "Read this first." Inside was a single handwritten letter. He unfolded it carefully, then began reading. My dear family, if this box has been opened, then I'm no longer with you. That thought makes me sad. But what makes me even sadder is knowing that one wound inside this family was never allowed to heal. For 12 years, one daughter carried a burden that never belonged to her, while another enjoyed a future that was never completely hers. I looked toward Sophia. She stared at the table. She hadn't looked at me once since entering the room. Michael continued. Some of you believe this story began when Grace couldn't attend college. You're wrong. It began much earlier. It began the first time someone decided one child's dream mattered more than another's. Dad slowly closed his eyes. I could see regret written across his face. But regret wasn't the same as accountability. Michael placed the letter aside, then reached for the first blue folder. Its label read, Education Savings Account. My heart immediately began racing. The college fund. For 12 years, I had avoided thinking about it because remembering it still hurt. Now, Grandma was finally opening that chapter. Michael carefully removed the first document. This is the original account opening statement. He adjusted his glasses. The account was established 18 days after Grace was born. He looked at me and smiled. Your grandmother contributed the very first deposit. I blinked. Grandma? He nodded. $500. She insisted education was the greatest investment anyone could make. Tears filled my eyes. I had never known. He continued reading. Over the next 18 years, the account received regular monthly deposits. He flipped through page after page. Parents, grandparents, birthday gifts, holiday contributions, investment interest. The balance grew steadily, year after year, until it reached almost $190,000. The room fell silent. I couldn't believe it. I had always imagined there might have been enough for tuition. I never realized there had been enough to graduate completely debt-free. Michael placed the statement on the table. This account existed. It was real. It was fully funded. He looked directly at my father. So, the question isn't whether Grace had a college fund. The question is, what happened to it? Nobody answered. He reached for the next bundle. Bank transfer records. Dozens of them. Every page carefully highlighted by Grandma. Every transaction marked with yellow notes. Michael looked down, then slowly exhaled. I understand now. Why Eleanor wanted everyone present. He lifted the first statement. The transfers didn't happen once. They happened repeatedly. Month after month, year after year. Small withdrawals at first. $3,000, $5,000, $8,000. Then larger ones. $15,000, $22,000, $30,000. Each transfer had one thing in common. Every single one listed the same destination account. Michael looked up, then quietly spoke the account holder's name. Sophia Mitchell. I felt as though the air had disappeared from the room. Dad immediately leaned forward. Wait. It's not what it looks like. Michael calmly replied, I haven't finished. Dad sat back, his hands trembling. Michael continued turning the pages. According to these bank records, the money paid for Sophia's private university tuition, her study abroad semester in Italy, her luxury apartment, her graduate school, her first business investment, her new SUV. The list continued. Vacation expenses, designer furniture, professional certification courses, even the down payment on Sophia's first condominium. Every dream I had quietly given up had become someone else's opportunity. One transfer at a time, one signature at a time, one excuse at a time. Then Michael held up the final document. Unlike the others, it contained two signatures. One belonged to my father, the other to my mother. He read the authorization aloud. Transfer remaining balance. From Grace Mitchell Education Trust to Sophia Mitchell Educational and Living Expenses Account. Remaining balance. $0. I stared at the page. Not because I doubted it. Because after 12 years, I finally had proof. The money hadn't disappeared. It hadn't been lost. It hadn't been spent during a financial emergency. It had been intentionally moved. Every dollar, every promise, every dream, signed away by the two people who had promised to protect my future. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, for the very first time since Grandma's funeral, my sister finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think she'd ever find out. Those 8 words changed everything. because they proved something far more painful than the missing money. Sophia had known the truth all along. I I didn't think she'd ever find out. Sophia's words hung in the air. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at me. Every pair of eyes turned toward her instead. For 12 years, my parents had insisted the money was simply gone. Financial problems, unexpected expenses, difficult decisions. Those were the excuses they repeated over and over again. Now, my sister had accidentally admitted something they had spent over a decade trying to hide. She had always known. Dad immediately stood. "Sophia, stop talking." His voice was sharper than I had heard in years. She looked at him, confused, almost frightened. "But you said—" "I said enough," he interrupted before she could finish. Michael Brooks quietly folded his hands. "No, I don't think enough has been said." The room became silent again. Dad slowly sat back down. For the first time in my life, he looked like a man who realized the truth could no longer be controlled. Michael reached into the safety deposit box again. This time, he removed 3 thick notebooks. Each one was covered in dark blue leather. Their pages were filled with handwritten notes. Sticky tabs divided the journals into sections. Across the first cover, Grandma had written, "Family Journal." Below that, in smaller handwriting, "If you're reading this, the truth finally matters more than protecting feelings." My heart tightened. Grandma had been documenting something, not for weeks, not for months, for years. Michael opened the first journal. Inside the cover was a note. "Memory fades. Documents don't. People forget conversations. Ink remembers them forever." That sentence sounded exactly like Grandma. She had never relied on assumptions. She believed in facts, dates, receipts, proof. Michael turned to the first bookmarked page. Entry. September 3rd. 12 years ago, he began reading. "Thomas and Janet visited today. Grace's college acceptance letters have started arriving. Instead of celebrating, they looked worried. Thomas admitted the education account had almost nothing left. I asked him what happened. He said, Sophia needed the money more." I looked at Dad. He closed his eyes. He couldn't even deny it anymore. Michael continued. "I reminded Thomas that the account belonged to Grace. He answered, 'Families share sacrifices.' I asked him one question. Did Sophia make any sacrifices? He couldn't answer. The room fell completely still. Dad slowly lowered his head. Michael turned another page. This entry had been written only 2 weeks later. Janet stopped by this afternoon. She cried for nearly an hour. She said Grace would understand because she's always been the strong one. Grandma's next sentence was underlined twice. Parents often give the strongest child the heaviest burden. That doesn't make it fair. Mom quietly began crying again. She remembered that conversation, word for word. Another page, another date, another painful memory. Sophia received a new luxury car today. Grace rode the city bus to work. Neither parent noticed the difference. I smiled sadly. I remembered that bus. Every morning. 2 transfers. 45 minutes each way. Rain, snow, summer heat. While Sophia drove past me in a brand new SUV. I never blamed her, because I still believed my parents had simply run out of money. Michael continued reading. Grace brought me groceries today. She insisted on paying even though I offered. She doesn't know I'm watching her count every dollar before buying herself lunch. Meanwhile, Thomas and Janet just paid for Sophia's kitchen renovation. The room became unbearably quiet. I had forgotten about those groceries. Grandma hadn't. She remembered everything. Michael paused. I believe this next entry is the most important one. He carefully turned several pages. The handwriting looked shakier. Grandma had grown older, but her words remained steady. I invited the family to dinner tonight, after dessert. I asked Sophia a direct question. Do you know where the money for your graduate school came from? Everyone looked at Sophia. She stopped breathing. Michael continued. She looked down. She whispered, yes. I asked why she accepted it. The room became painfully quiet. Michael looked toward Sophia. I think everyone deserves to hear your grandmother's answer. He continued reading. Sophia cried. She told me she wanted to refuse. But Janet said Grace wasn't using the money anymore. Thomas said, one successful daughter is better than two struggling ones. I felt my chest tighten. Dad had actually said that? One successful daughter was enough? Dad immediately looked at me. Grace, I was wrong. His voice cracked. I've been wrong for years. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, because I genuinely didn't know what to say. Some apologies arrived too late to repair what they broke. Michael turned another page. This one had a yellow sticky note attached. Across it, Grandma had written, read slowly. He nodded, then began. Today, I asked Thomas one final question. If Grace discovers the truth, how will you explain it? He answered, she'll forgive us. Grandma had written only one sentence underneath. Never confuse someone's kindness with permission to hurt them. I felt tears filling my eyes again. Grandma understood me better than anyone. Even when I stayed silent, she knew silence wasn't the same as healing. Michael carefully closed the first journal. There are two more. Dad looked exhausted. Do we really need to keep going? Michael answered softly. Eleanor thought so. He reached back into the box, pulled out another sealed envelope. Unlike everything else, it wasn't addressed to the family. It was addressed to me. Across the front, Grandma had written, for Grace, only after everyone learns the truth. Michael smiled gently. I think we've reached that moment. He handed me the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should have. Inside, I could feel another set of documents. And something else. Something rigid. Almost like a bank certificate. I carefully opened the flap, pulled out the first page. At the top, in bold letters, were 6 words that instantly made my heart race. Investment account statement. Eleanor Mitchell. Trust. I looked at the balance, then looked up at Michael. This can't be right. He smiled through tears. Oh, it is. And your grandmother has been building it. For the last 12 years. I couldn't take my eyes off the account statement. For a moment, I genuinely thought I was reading someone else's name. At the top of the page were the words, the Eleanor Mitchell Educational Investment Trust, directly beneath it, in bold letters. Primary beneficiary, Grace Elizabeth Mitchell. My hands started trembling. I blinked several times. The numbers didn't change. The balance was still there. I looked at Michael. This has to be a mistake. He smiled gently. I assure you, it isn't. The room remained silent. Even Sophia leaned forward to see the statement. Dad slowly removed his glasses. Mom covered her mouth. Nobody had expected another account, least of all me. Michael adjusted the papers. This account was opened exactly 34 days after Grace declined her university admission. My heart skipped. 34 days. While I was working extra shifts at the grocery store, trying to convince myself life would somehow work out, Grandma had quietly begun rebuilding everything that had been taken from me, without telling anyone. without asking for recognition, without making promises she wasn't certain she could keep. She simply started, one deposit at a time. Michael continued. The opening balance, $5,000. I frowned. Grandma didn't have that kind of money. He smiled. No. She sold her antique jewelry collection. I stared at him. The jewelry Grandpa gave her? He nodded. Every piece. The room fell completely silent. Grandma treasured those heirlooms. She wore Grandpa's sapphire brooch every Christmas. She once told me she'd never part with it because it reminded her of the happiest years of her life. Now I knew why it had quietly disappeared. She hadn't sold it because she stopped loving Grandpa. She sold it because she loved me. Michael reached for another envelope. This explains everything. Inside was a handwritten note, in Grandma's careful handwriting. He began reading. My sweet Grace, if you're reading this, then I've already left this world. I wish I could be sitting beside you instead. I'd make you a cup of tea, tell you everything will be all right, and remind you that storms never last forever. Tears blurred my vision. That sounded exactly like Grandma. Whenever life became difficult, tea came first, advice came second. The day your parents emptied your college fund, I watched something disappear from your eyes. It wasn't hope. It wasn't ambition. It was trust. That hurt me more than losing any amount of money ever could. I lowered my head. She had noticed, even though I tried so hard to pretend I was fine. You smiled through family dinners. You congratulated Sophia on every success. You never once complained. Everyone believed you had accepted what happened. I knew better. I knew you were carrying disappointment quietly because you didn't want anyone else to feel uncomfortable. Fresh tears rolled down my face. Grandma had always seen through my smile. She understood the pain I never spoke about. Michael continued. The strongest people often become invisible. Not because they're unimportant, but because everyone assumes they'll always survive. I refuse to become another person who overlooked you. Mom quietly sobbed. She couldn't even lift her head. Every sentence seemed directed at her. Michael placed the letter aside, then opened another folder. Inside were dozens of investment statements. Every page documented years of careful planning. Small deposits, dividend payments, long-term investments. Nothing flashy, nothing reckless, just patience, consistency, faith. The account grew slowly, Michael explained. Eleanor never tried to become rich. She simply refused to let Grace's future remain stolen. He flipped through the statements. Every birthday, Grandma deposited money. Every Christmas, another contribution. Whenever she sold handmade quilts at the local charity fair, she added the profits. Whenever she received pension increases, she invested them too. She had quietly spent 12 years rebuilding my future, dollar by dollar. Dad suddenly whispered, I never knew. Michael looked directly at him. That's because Eleanor didn't trust you to know. Those words landed harder than anyone expected. Dad lowered his head. He had lost something far more valuable than money. He had lost his mother's confidence. Michael turned to the final statement. The current balance. He paused, then smiled. After 12 years of growth, he slowly turned the paper toward me. $6,484,117.82. I couldn't breathe. The original college fund had been less than $200,000. Grandma's patience had turned it into more than 3 times that amount. Not through luck, through discipline, through time, through love. Sophia suddenly began crying. Real tears, not quiet tears. The kind that come from finally seeing yourself clearly. I never deserved any of it. Nobody answered. She continued. I knew where the money came from. I told myself, I'd pay it back someday. But every year, it became easier to pretend I didn't owe anything. She looked at me. I wasn't just stealing money. I was stealing years of your life. Those words hurt, because they were true. Money can sometimes be earned again. Lost years cannot. Mom reached across the table, trying to hold my hand. I gently pulled mine away, not out of hatred, because I wasn't ready. She nodded. I understand. For the first time in years, she wasn't demanding forgiveness. She was respecting my boundaries. Michael reached into the bottom of the safety deposit box one final time. There is one last letter. Eleanor specifically instructed that it be read only after everyone had seen the investment account. He unfolded the final page. The handwriting was noticeably weaker. Grandma had clearly written it during her final illness, but every word remained unmistakably hers. To my family, money can be replaced. Trust cannot. One daughter lost opportunities. The other lost peace. And two parents lost the confidence of both. That wasn't an accident. It was the price of favoritism. The room fell silent. No one could deny it anymore. Not after the journals. Not after the bank records. Not after the investment statements. The truth was complete. Michael continued. Grace, this account belongs to you. Use it however you choose. Go to college. Start a business. Travel the world. Help strangers. Or save every dollar. The choice is finally yours. Because that's what should have happened 12 years ago. I smiled through tears. For the first time since I was 18, someone had given my future back to me, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to let the past write the rest of my life. Michael slowly folded the letter. There is one final instruction. He looked at me. Eleanor asked that your decision be announced to the family before we leave this room. Everyone turned toward me. Dad, Mom, Sophia, all waiting, not to hear what Grandma had chosen, but to hear what I would choose. I looked at the investment statement one last time, then slowly stood. I've already made my decision. The room became perfectly silent. Nobody realized it yet. But the next few minutes would change the Mitchell family forever. I've already made my decision. The room became completely silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even shifted in their chair. For 12 years, my future had been decided by everyone except me. My parents decided my education wasn't the priority. Sophia decided accepting my college fund was easier than questioning it. Even life itself had decided to place me on a path I never chose. But now, for the first time since I was 18 years old, the choice belonged entirely to me. I looked around the room, at my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bicycle, yet signed away the money meant for my education. At my mother, the woman who kissed my forehead every night as a child, but somehow convinced herself I would understand. Then I looked at Sophia, my older sister, the person I had admired growing up, the person who celebrated graduation after graduation, while I quietly stocked grocery shelves before sunrise. I took a deep breath. I forgive all of you. Mom burst into tears. Dad covered his face. Sophia looked up in disbelief. But before anyone could speak, I continued. Forgiveness doesn't mean nothing happened. It doesn't erase 12 years. It doesn't erase broken promises. It simply means I'm not willing to carry this anger for the rest of my life. The room remained silent. Those words weren't for them. They were for me. Because I finally understood something Grandma had tried to teach me. Bitterness is another kind of prison. and I had spent enough years trapped already. Dad slowly stood. His hands trembled. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, I replied honestly. You don't. The truth landed heavily. But Grandma didn't rebuild my future so I could spend the rest of my life hating mine. Dad's shoulders shook. For the first time in my life, I saw my father cry without trying to hide it. I kept telling myself I was helping the family. I thought if Sophia became successful, she would help everyone else later. He looked down at the table. I never realized I was sacrificing one daughter to reward another. There was nothing I could say, because he was finally saying the words he should have spoken 12 years earlier. Mom quietly reached into her purse. She removed a small envelope. I've carried this for years. She placed it on the table in front of me. Inside was the original acceptance letter from Westbrook School of Architecture, perfectly preserved. She whispered, I couldn't throw it away. I looked at it almost every week. Every time I saw your name, I remembered what we took from you. I carefully unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but the word at the top remained clear. Congratulations. For 12 years. That single word had represented everything I believed I had lost. Now, it represented something different. Not regret. A reminder that dreams delayed are not always dreams destroyed. Sophia finally stood. She walked to the center of the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, she removed a folder from her bag. I brought something today. Michael looked puzzled. What is it? She slid the folder across the table toward me. I sold my condominium last month. Dad looked shocked. You sold your condo? She nodded. I've known Grandma was sick for a while. I started thinking about everything. She looked directly at me. I can't return 12 years. But I can return what never belonged to me. Inside the folder were certified bank documents, a cashier's check, property sale records. The amount totaled just over $300,000. I know it isn't enough, she whispered, but it's everything I can give. I looked at the check, then back at Sophia. For the first time since we were children, she wasn't acting like the favorite daughter. She was simply trying to become a better sister. I gently pushed the check back across the table. I'm not taking it. She stared at me. Grace, you have to. I smiled softly. No. Grandma already gave me back my future. If I take this, you'll spend the rest of your life believing money erased what happened. It won't. She began crying again. I don't know how to fix this. I walked over and hugged her. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I quietly whispered, You don't fix 12 years in one afternoon. You fix them, one honest choice at a time. Several months later, I made my own decision about Grandma's investment account. People assumed I would finally enroll in architecture school. I thought about it for weeks. Then, I remembered something Grandma once told me. Education isn't only about earning degrees. It's about creating opportunities. That's when I knew exactly what to do. I completed my architecture degree through a flexible university program, not because I needed to prove anything, because I still loved designing spaces that brought people together. At the same time, I established the Eleanor Mitchell Education Foundation. Every year, the foundation would award scholarships to students whose college dreams had been threatened by financial hardship. Not because they were the smartest, not because they had the highest grades, but because no young person should lose their future because someone else decided it wasn't important. The first year, we awarded 5 scholarships. The second year, 11. By the 5th year, more than 60 students had attended college because of Grandma's kindness. Her investment hadn't just changed one life, it had multiplied into dozens, exactly the way she would have wanted. Dad retired early, not because he had to, because he wanted to spend the rest of his life volunteering with organizations that helped first-generation college students. One afternoon, he quietly admitted something to me. "I kept trying to earn your forgiveness." I smiled. "You don't earn forgiveness. You honor it." He nodded. From that day forward, he stopped apologizing with words and started apologizing with actions. Mom became a volunteer mentor for single mothers. She often shared her own mistakes, not to gain sympathy, but to warn other parents about the danger of favoritism. She once told a support group, "The worst thing I ever did was convincing myself one child was strong enough to carry what should have been shared by all of us." She never excused her choices again. She simply owned them. Sophia's life changed too. She accepted a smaller apartment, a simpler lifestyle. She started teaching financial literacy classes at a local community center. During one class, a teenager asked, "What's the biggest financial mistake you've ever seen?" Sophia smiled sadly. It wasn't about money. It was believing someone else's sacrifice belonged to me. That answer stayed with every student in the room, because some debts can't be measured in dollars. Every spring, on Grandma Eleanor's birthday, our family meets at the small public library where she volunteered for 20 years. We donate books, fund scholarships, read stories to children, and afterward, we visit her grave together. Not because tradition demands it, because gratitude does. Last year, I placed one of Grandma's old journals beside her headstone for a few minutes, not to leave it there, just to thank her. Because without those journals, without her courage, without her quiet determination, the truth would have disappeared forever. People sometimes ask me if I regret losing 12 years. I always answer the same way. I regret the pain. I don't regret the person it helped me become. Then they usually ask a second question. "Were you ever angry at Grandma for not telling you sooner?" I smile. No. She wasn't waiting to protect the secret. She was waiting until the truth could no longer be denied. There's a difference, a very important one. Grandma once wrote a sentence in the final page of her journal. It's framed on the wall of my office today. It says, "Favoritism may shape a childhood, but fairness can still shape a lifetime." Every morning, before I begin work, I read those words, not because they remind me of what I lost, but because they remind me of what one extraordinary grandmother refused to let me lose: my future, my hope, and my belief that truth, eventually, finds its way home.